I never thought my life would unravel this way. It's funny how you can be in the middle of a storm, not even knowing the full force of it, and yet everything feels eerily calm. That's how I was when it happened. I was in the car with my brother, Max. We'd been driving back from a funeral. My uncle, who had always been distant but somehow still felt like family. I remember the way the sky was fading into a bruised purple, the headlights of the car cutting through the hazy evening air. It wasn't the best of days, but it wasn't the worst either. At least not yet. Max was talking like he always did. He had a tendency to ramble on, especially when he was nervous or upset. I wasn't really listening. I should have been, but I was. I had my earbuds in, playing a podcast that wasn't interesting, but the static noise was comforting. A distraction. That's what I needed. A distraction from everything: my mother's icy silence, my father's inability to feel anything deeper than frustration, and the weight of a family that, for all its years of togetherness, felt like it was splintering at the edges. Then the screech of tires. It happened so fast. One moment, we were cruising along the highway, and the next, we were spiraling out of control. I remember the wheel jerking violently in Max's hands, his panicked shout as he tried to regain control. Then everything went black. A family that seems to have it all, but behind the smiles lies a secret they're too afraid to face. You think you know everything about them, but the truth will make you rethink it all. Don't miss the shattered pieces where every relationship is hanging by a thread. Hit watch more to step into their dark world and find out, can love heal all wounds, or will it only make things worse? If you're hooked and don't want to miss a single moment, subscribe now and stay with us on this gripping journey. And don't forget to leave a comment below. What do you think? Can they survive this family tragedy? We'd love to hear your thoughts. When I woke up, I wasn't in the back of a wrecked car. I wasn't surrounded by firemen or paramedics or even my brother, who I thought would be by my side. No, I woke up in a sterile hospital room, the air thick with antiseptic and the beeping of machines monitoring my every breath. My body felt like it had been torn apart and stitched back together, pain flooding my chest and limbs. The sharp scent of disinfectant made me dizzy, and my throat was dry, like I had swallowed broken glass. I tried to sit up, but my arms were strapped to the bed, hooked up to IVs that I didn't remember getting. A quiet groan escaped my lips, barely a sound, but it was enough to make the nurse notice me. Her expression wasn't one of surprise or sympathy, but something colder, detached. I don't know how long I was out, but it wasn't long enough to forget everything. Max, the accident, the blood, and the feeling that something, somewhere, had gone terribly wrong. The door creaked open, and there they were. My parents. They didn't rush in with the usual frantic concern that you'd expect. No tears, no frantic grasping of my hand. No, they walked in like it was just another day. "She's awake," my mother said, her voice flat, almost bored, as she glanced at the doctor, not at me. She didn't look at me the way I would have expected. Not with relief or joy, not even with fear. Just a detached acknowledgement that I was still breathing. "Good," the doctor replied. "You've been through a major surgery, lost a kidney in the accident, but you're stable now. We saved you." I felt my heart race, the numbness in my limbs creeping slowly into my chest as I tried to process his words. Lost a kidney? I wanted to ask about Max, but my throat burned and I couldn't speak. The nurse offered me ice chips, but it only made it worse, the cold against my parched throat making it harder to breathe. "Max," I finally managed, my voice coming out like a rasp. "Max is fine," my mother answered, her voice clipped, uninterested. walked away with a few scratches. You, on the other hand, will be here for a while, don't get too comfortable. It felt like a slap in the face, but I couldn't do anything about it. What was there to say? What could I say? The days blended together in a haze of pain and silence. I lay in that hospital bed, trapped in a body that felt alien, a mind that couldn't fully process what had happened. Max never came to visit. Neither did my parents unless they had to. My mom would stop by to sign a form or check in on the medical bills, but she never stayed long enough to even ask how I was feeling. I kept wondering if I was imagining it. Maybe they were just dealing with the shock, the guilt. Maybe they couldn't process what had happened. But then, one night, everything changed. I couldn't sleep. The pain from the surgery was too sharp, my mind too restless. I was half dozing when I heard voices outside my door. My mind, still muddled, tried to make sense of it. It was late, too late for anything good, but I could hear my parents' voices. Low, urgent, almost whispering. "You're saying if we take her other kidney." And my mother's voice was calm, too calm. "She wouldn't survive that," the doctor replied, his tone firm, professional. "But Liam needs it," my father interrupted, his voice thick with something darker, entitlement maybe. "He's the one with a future. She won't ever be able to do much. She'll never run again, never live the life she dreamed of. She's just a girl," my mother continued, as though I wasn't even in the room. I felt a sick wave of panic rise in my throat. My parents were talking about me like I was a nonentity. I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't their child. I was an object, a donor. The world went still. I tried to pull the sheets over my head, to close my eyes, to block out their words, but I couldn't. My own parents were planning to take my life, not my future, not my potential, but my actual life to save my brother. They didn't care what happened to me. Not really. All of the years of love they supposedly gave me, all of the moments they claimed to cherish, they all evaporated in that instant. They were willing to kill me for Max. For their perfect, golden son. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw things. But all I could do was lie there, paralyzed, as my heart shattered. I don't even know how long I lay there, pretending to sleep, pretending not to hear them plotting my end. And that's when I knew I wasn't just going to survive. I wasn't just going to wake up and get better. I was going to get out. I was going to take control of my life again. No one, not even my own family, was going to take that from me. I couldn't move, but I was going to make sure they never forgot what they tried to do to me. The night dragged on in that sterile hospital room, the kind of night that feels like it's stretching on forever, as if the seconds themselves are too tired to move. I couldn't sleep. I tried, but the pain was a constant buzz in the back of my mind, never quite letting me forget where I was or what had happened. My limbs ached in ways I couldn't describe, as if my bones were rebelling against the weight of life itself. I could feel the remnants of the surgery, scar tissue that had no business being inside me. A part of me had been taken without my permission, without even a whisper of consent. My thoughts raced, spiraling in a way I couldn't control. What did they really think of me? I mean, they must have known, right? That I could hear them, that I was aware of the decisions they were making behind closed doors. Or were they so disconnected from reality, so numb to me, that they didn't even think twice about speaking so freely? The thought made my stomach churn. It wasn't just the fact that they wanted to take my life to save Max, it was that they never even considered asking me. I wasn't a person to them, not really. I was an object, a thing, a necessary sacrifice. I tried to focus on the ceiling, to find some sense of comfort in the cold, fluorescent light above me, but all it did was remind me of how alien this place felt. The sterile walls, the quiet murmurs of distant nurses, the drip of fluids into my veins, everything about this place felt like a prison. But I wasn't sure which was worse, the physical cage of the hospital or the mental one that my family had locked me in. I should have been angry, I should have screamed, but I was numb. I felt the anger, sure, but it wasn't as sharp as I imagined it would be. Instead, I was filled with a quiet dread. A deep, hollow sensation that made it hard to breathe. This wasn't just about my physical survival anymore. This was about something far worse. This was about being erased. What if I wasn't meant to survive this? What if, in the end, they really did just want me gone? The thought lingered like a dark cloud. I couldn't shake it. It wasn't just the surgery, or even the way my parents acted, it was the look in their eyes. The way they barely registered my existence. The coldness that had seeped into their faces. My mom didn't even flinch when the doctor mentioned the possibility of taking my other kidney. And my dad, he barely cared. He was more concerned about Max's future, about keeping his perfect little boy intact. I was expendable. And I hated that. It was a slow realization, but it hit me with the weight of a ton of bricks. They didn't love me the way I thought they did. They didn't care about my pain, my suffering. The only thing that mattered to them was Max. I wasn't even a second thought. I was a liability. A problem to be dealt with, disposed of. It felt like betrayal. I lay there, the steady rhythm of the machines around me doing nothing to ease the sinking feeling in my chest. I had to do something. I couldn't just lie here and wait for them to decide my fate. I couldn't just wait for them to come back and tell me, in thaw. But what could I do? I could barely move. I could barely speak. I was hooked up to machines that kept me tethered to this place, to this life that felt like it was slipping away. That's when I made a decision. I would ask for help. I would make sure that someone, anyone, knew what was going on. I wasn't going to let them steal my life, not without a fight. The next morning, the pain was still there, sharp and unforgiving, but something else was different. A quiet resolve settled in me, something stronger than the ache in my body. I asked for a social worker. The nurse looked at me like I was crazy. I don't think they were used to patients who spoke up for themselves, especially ones who seemed so vulnerable. But I wasn't just a patient. I was a person. I had a voice, even if I could barely speak above a whisper. By the afternoon, a woman named Judith came to see me. She was older than I expected, her face kind but worn with experience. Her voice was gentle, but there was something about her that made me trust her instantly. She didn't ask questions at first. She just sat beside me, watching, waiting for me to speak. I didn't cry. I couldn't. There were no tears left, but I told her everything. Everything that had happened in the hospital, everything I had overheard. How my parents had treated me like I was disposable. How they wanted to take my kidney for Max, without so much as a single word of consent from me. Her face changed as I spoke, her expression turning from concern to something darker, something like disbelief. When I finished, she didn't write a word down at first. She just sat there, staring at me, processing what I had said. Her eyes were kind, but they were also sharp, searching for the truth in my words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "You did the right thing by telling me," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the undercurrent of anger that had been building in her. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Judith's eyes softened. "We'll protect you," she said, as if those words could solve everything. I wasn't so sure. Protection was a nice idea, but I didn't know if it would be enough. But at that moment, I believed her. I had to, because right then, she was my only hope. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I had been wrong for even hoping this would be easy. As much as Judith's words brought a spark of hope, they also felt distant, like something promised to someone who didn't deserve it. What did protection mean if my own family could turn against me so easily? Would they still try to take me apart, piece by piece, without a care for the person I was? The days that followed blurred together, just a haze of pain medication, whispered conversations, and the odd hours of light and dark that filtered through the blinds. I wasn't sure if I was healing or just existing, trapped in a world where I was less than human. But I tried to hold onto the memory of Judith's promise. She would protect me. She had to. The hospital room started to feel even more like a cage after she left. I could hear the quiet murmur of nurses going about their work, but no one spoke to me unless they had to. My parents still didn't come. I kept waiting for them, hoping maybe they'd show up with some kind of apology. That they'd realize how wrong they were and beg for my forgiveness. But they didn't. The only visits I had were from the social worker, Judith. She would sit with me for hours, talking about my options, my rights, the things my parents were trying to control without my knowledge. It was during one of those sessions when she first mentioned the protective order. "You don't have to go back with them," Judith said, sitting across from me one afternoon. She leaned in slightly, her voice soft but firm. "You have legal recourse. You can separate yourself from them." I didn't know how to respond. The idea of being legally separated from my family was so foreign. Could I even do it? Would I even be allowed? Judith must have seen the fear on my face because she reached over and placed her hand on mine. Her touch was warm and comforting, a brief moment of kindness in a place that had stripped me of everything else. "We'll get this done, Claire," she said, her eyes steady with conviction. "You don't deserve to go back to that." It was the first time I'd ever heard someone speak to me like that, as if my feelings, my life, actually mattered. Like I had a voice that deserved to be heard. It wasn't long before the paperwork started. Judith was relentless. She contacted lawyers, filed complaints, and pushed through a case with an urgency I hadn't expected. A protective order was put in place. My parents couldn't touch me, not legally, not physically. For the first time in days, I felt like I had control, like I wasn't completely at the mercy of the people who were supposed to love me. The day the protective order went through was the day I started to feel like I could breathe again. I remember the moment the nurse told me that my parents couldn't come into my room without permission, that they no longer had access to my medical decisions. There was a small, fragile part of me that wanted to laugh, to scream in relief, but I couldn't. I was still recovering, still tethered to the bed by the machines that kept my body alive. But even then, I felt a shift in the air. The sense of powerlessness that had consumed me for so long started to unravel piece by piece. Still, the weight of what had happened never fully lifted. The emotional scars ran deeper than the physical ones. And while I now had legal protection, I knew that didn't mean everything would be okay. My parents were still out there, still somewhere in the world, and they weren't the kind of people who would give up easily. It wasn't long before they found out about the protective order. I can still remember the day they showed up at the hospital, both of them. The scene felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare. They stormed into the waiting room, shouting for someone to let them see me. Security had to be called. I heard their voices from my room. My mother was yelling at a nurse. accusing them of brainwashing me. My father was pacing, his face twisted with anger. I couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but I didn't need to. Their words were already clear in my mind. They were furious. They felt betrayed. They didn't care about the order or the fact that they couldn't touch me anymore. They only cared about regaining control, about getting me back in line. I closed my eyes and let the sounds of their shouting wash over me. Part of me wanted to yell back, to confront them, but I didn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face them, not until I was stronger. But it was a moment of clarity. It was the first time I realized they didn't care about me, not the real me, not the person I was becoming. They didn't care about my pain, my suffering, or the sacrifice they were willing to make for their golden child. I was a pawn in their game. I always had been. And now they were losing. It wasn't long after the incident with security that I was discharged from the hospital. 3 weeks. That was all it took for me to go from being a broken girl in a hospital bed to someone who was free, someone who was finally beginning to understand her own worth. I was placed into foster care. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't perfect. The apartment was small, the mattress thin, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt safe. I didn't have to worry about my parents showing up, demanding that I go back with them, or worse, trying to get me to give them what they wanted. It was simple, but it was mine. I started high school online while I recovered. The work was hard, but I was determined to get through it. I didn't want their charity. I didn't want their pity. I wanted to build something for myself, something that no one could take away from me, and I did. I worked nights at a bookstore, saving every penny I could. I didn't accept any help from social services. I didn't want to owe anyone anything, especially not after everything my family had tried to take from me. It wasn't much at first, but I learned. I worked. I built my life from the ground up. I thought the worst was behind me, but I was wrong. It's strange, the way that gnawing doubt kept me up at night. The pain was less physical now, but the scars on my soul were deeper than I cared to admit. I was trying to make peace with the idea of being alone. After all, I'd spent so much time being invisible in my family. Maybe it was better this way. But the more I tried to convince myself that solitude was my choice, the more I realized it was something else. It wasn't freedom, it was loneliness. The kind of loneliness that doesn't just come from being alone, it's the kind that creeps in from the way your own family stops recognizing you. The way they start to act like you never existed at all. I thought I was done with them, that I had cut myself loose. But part of me kept waiting, like some part of me still believed they'd come back. That maybe they'd change. That maybe they'd finally see me. That's when it happened. I got an email. It was short, matter of fact, but it still hit me like a punch in the gut. The subject line, "Your brothers resume," I froze. It had been months since I last heard anything from my family, but suddenly, here it was, Max's name staring back at me from the screen. The same Max I had once loved like any sister would. The same Max who never even came to see me after the accident. The one who didn't seem to care that I almost died, that I had lost a kidney, my future, because of a decision that was made without me. And now he was looking for a job at a company I had spent the last few years building. The email was simple. Someone from HR had sent it to me, asking if I wanted to consider him for an open role. He didn't know it was me. How could he? After all, I had changed everything, my name, my life, my future. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel when I saw his name on that resume. Anger, yes. Resentment, definitely. But there was also something else. Something raw. Hope. Hope that maybe this would be my chance to make him see me, to make him understand what he had done, what they had all done. And maybe, just maybe, it would be my moment to take control of my own fate for the first time, to make sure I was the one calling the shots. I hesitated for a long time, staring at the screen, the cursor blinking in front of me, mocking me with its silence. But then something shifted inside me, something dark and powerful that I couldn't ignore. I didn't just want him to understand. I wanted him to feel the weight of everything he had done. I invited him to an in-person interview. It felt like the right thing to do, but the closer the day came, the more I doubted myself. What if he didn't remember me? What if he thought I was just some girl who had faded away? What if he didn't care about what had happened to me? What if I wasn't strong enough to do this? But I had no choice now. I had already made the decision. The interview day arrived faster than I expected. When Max walked through the door of the conference room, I saw it all. The same Max who had never come to visit me in the hospital. The Max who was still, somehow, the golden child of my parents' world. He didn't recognize me, of course. He couldn't. The look on his face when he saw me sitting at the head of the table, my name, my real name, on the placard in front of me, said it all. Shock, confusion, a little fear if I was being honest. He stood frozen for a moment, his mouth moving but no words coming out. You, he finally stammered, his voice trembling. Yes, I said simply, leaning back in my chair. Alive, healthy, and more than just a donor on a hospital bed. He swallowed, his eyes darting between my face and the sleek, polished surroundings of the conference room, clearly overwhelmed by the unexpected power I held. His resume was in front of me, and I couldn't help but let out a small laugh. His grades, average. His experience, thin at best. But what really stood out to me was the entitlement that dripped from every word. You didn't think I'd survive, did you, Max? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. His eyes dropped to the floor, unable to meet my gaze. I saw the panic in his eyes, the realization that everything he thought he knew about me was wrong. I didn't know what they said, he whispered, his voice faltering. I leaned forward, pressing the point. They told the doctor to take my kidney without asking me. They said I wasn't important, that you were worth more than me. Did you know that, Max? He didn't respond. I stood up slowly, walking around the table, my fingers tapping the top of his resume. I read your resume. Your grades are average, your experience is thin, and your entitlement. Well, that's fully intact. But you're begging for this job, aren't you? Just like you begged for me to disappear. His face flushed crimson. Please, I need this job. Things have been tough. I cut him off. Things were tough for me too, Max. You didn't care then, so why should I care now? Max opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He had nothing to say. Nothing to justify the years of neglect, the betrayal that ran deeper than blood. I took one last glance at him, my heart heavy but resolute. No, Max, you don't get to walk into this company like nothing happened. You don't get to pretend like I'm invisible. The days following the confrontation with Max felt like a blur. I had no idea what I expected to happen next. Maybe a sense of victory, or maybe some sort of relief that I had finally stood up for myself. But neither of those came. Instead, all I had was a deep, gnawing emptiness. The kind of emptiness you feel when you realize that everything you've worked so hard to build is somehow still hollow. I watched Max leave the room that day. His face was red, his hands clenched by his sides, his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Good. He deserved that silence, but something inside me was still unsettled. I had confronted him, yes, I had called out the injustice, the cold disregard they had all shown me, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that there was more. That what I had done wasn't enough to truly break the hold they had over me. The power they had over me, over my mind, my emotions, had been more insidious than I had realized. For so long, I had thought it was all about survival. I thought once I got out of that hospital, once I cut ties with my family, everything would be fine. That I could just move on and rebuild. But what I hadn't counted on was the weight of their absence. The feeling of being alone, of having no one left in my corner. No family, no foundation. In the days that followed, I spent hours alone in my tiny apartment. I worked at the bookstore. I kept my head down. But the walls, they felt like they were closing in on me. The loneliness was like a shadow that wouldn't leave me, no matter how hard I tried to push it away. The silence was deafening. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but the truth was starting to settle in. The anger I had for Max, for my parents, for everything they had done to me, was still there. But it wasn't as clean as I had imagined. It wasn't as simple as just cutting them off, as walking away and never looking back. No, the truth was far messier than that. I still missed them. It was a thought I hated to admit. I hated it because it made me feel weak, like I was somehow complicit in the whole mess. Like I was still waiting for them to come and save me. But I wasn't that person anymore, was I? The girl they had tried to erase, the girl they had betrayed, was gone. Or at least, she should be. So why did I still feel like I was carrying her with me? There were nights when I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the past pressing down on me. I thought about the moment in the hospital when I had heard them talking about taking my kidney. The way they dismissed me, the coldness in their voices. I remembered the day Max walked into that interview room and didn't recognize me, and I felt that familiar ache in my chest, the ache of being invisible, of being forgotten. I had wanted them to see me, to feel guilty for what they had done. But maybe they never would. Maybe they didn't even care. One morning, while I was sorting through books in the back of the store, I got another email. It was from an anonymous sender. It read, "Your parents need help. They're in trouble. Your brother, he's in debt, struggling to find a job, and they're losing the house. They need you. They're asking for your help." The email hit me like a sucker punch to the gut. I sat down in the corner of the store, gripping the edge of the table as the words swirled in my head. They need you. It was like a loop in my mind that I couldn't stop. After everything they did, after the way they tossed me aside, they need me. How could they need me? How could they have the nerve to ask for my help after all the pain they caused me? I stared at the email for a long time, my mind spinning. There was no part of me that wanted to help them. Not after the way they'd treated me, not after everything. But then there was a small voice inside, a voice I hated, that told me to think about it. To think about Max. About the boy who had never visited me in the hospital, who had probably thought I was dead. What if he needed me? What if I was the only one who could help him? I closed my eyes and leaned back against the wall, trying to calm the storm inside me. The truth was, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. The lines between right and wrong were starting to blur. I had spent so much time building up this image of myself as strong and independent, as someone who didn't need anyone. But now, in this moment, I wasn't so sure. I didn't want to go back to them, but part of me felt like I had no choice. Part of me felt like I needed to make things right, to somehow fix what had been broken. But what would it cost me? What would it cost to go back into the belly of the beast, to walk back into the place where I had been discarded so easily? Could I really help them, Or would I just be stepping into another trap? The doubt gnawed at me as I sat there, alone in the store. I kept coming back to the same question: what do I owe them? I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what was the right thing to do. And maybe that was the hardest part, the uncertainty. The fact that I had spent so long running from them, but now I wasn't sure if I could keep running anymore. Maybe the only way forward was to confront them, to face everything they had done to me, and to finally decide if I could forgive them, if I could find it in myself to help them, or maybe, just maybe, I was finally done with them. The decision hung in the air like a thick fog, and I couldn't escape it. The decision I was avoiding, delaying, really was finally knocking at my door. I spent the next few days in a haze. The email had planted a seed in my mind, but I couldn't get it out. I kept reading it over and over, the words they need you echoing in my head like a constant drumbeat. It wasn't like I had any answers, or that I could even begin to understand why they were reaching out now, after everything. But I couldn't deny the pull. The part of me that still had a shred of compassion, however twisted, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, they weren't beyond saving. Or worse yet, maybe I wasn't beyond them. But as the days passed, it felt like I was suffocating under the weight of this decision. The pressure of it, the uncertainty, it gnawed at my insides, leaving me restless, unable to focus. I kept working, kept moving through life, but I felt like I was stuck, like my own thoughts were paralyzing me. And then there it was, the phone call. I didn't expect it. The sound of the phone ringing broke the silence of my apartment. I almost didn't pick up. Part of me wanted to just pretend I hadn't seen the name on the caller ID. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail and let it be done just like that. But I couldn't. I picked up the phone and heard my mother's voice. It was strained, softer than I had ever heard it, but it was unmistakable. "Claire," she said, her voice tight like she was choking on the words. "We need to talk. About Max. About everything." I held the phone in my hand, feeling the weight of her voice in a way that almost physically hurt. I had prepared for this moment in my head. I had imagined so many different scenarios, rehearsed the words I would say. But none of those words came to me now. I was quiet, unsure of what to say. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she continued, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm just asking for a chance to explain, to fix what we broke." I didn't respond at first. Her words hung in the air, too heavy to process. My heart beat loudly in my chest, echoing in the silence between us. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell her how much they had hurt me, how much they had destroyed me. I wanted to scream at her for everything, to make her understand that nothing she said would ever undo what had been done. But the silence between us stretched on, and something shifted inside me. A quiet, bitter part of me started to wonder if I really could just let this go, if there was even a chance for healing. Maybe I had to decide for myself if I was done with them, or if the wounds they left on me were still worth trying to heal. "Do you remember the hospital?" I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper, but heavy with years of buried pain. She didn't answer right away. I could feel her hesitation, like she was fighting with the words, as if she wanted to apologize but couldn't bring herself to say it. "I remember," she said after a long pause. "I know I wasn't there for you. I don't know what I was thinking. All I wanted was for Max to be okay." And in that moment, something inside me snapped. The anger, the betrayal, it hit me all at once, like a tidal wave crashing over me. It was too much, all of it. The guilt, the years of being neglected, the constant feeling of being the afterthought, the object to be sacrificed. And the worst part? She was still justifying it. She was still trying to make it sound like she had a good reason. I felt my heart race. I wanted to shout at her, to throw my anger and pain right at her. I wanted to demand answers, to force her to feel what I had felt. But I didn't. Instead, I let the silence fall again. "Don't," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't known I still had. "Don't make excuses for what you did. I'm done with your lies, and I'm done with you." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, a fragile pause where I thought maybe she would finally get it. Maybe she would finally understand the depth of what she had done. But then she spoke again, and her words were sharp, defensive. "You think it was easy for us. You think we didn't hurt too? Max was our son, Claire. We didn't know what else to do." Her voice cracked again, like she was trying so hard to sound like she cared, but I could hear the selfishness underneath it. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. My body trembled. I had heard it all before. The excuses, the justifications. It wasn't enough anymore. It was never going to be enough. For the first time in years, I realized the truth. They would never understand. They would never see me. Not the way I needed them to, and I was done waiting for them to try. I ended the call. I stood there in the silence of my apartment, feeling the adrenaline course through me. My hand was shaking, but I didn't know if it was from the anger or from the relief. It was like I had finally said goodbye to something I had been carrying for so long. It was painful. It was brutal. But I knew it was the right choice. Max, my parents, they were ghosts of the past now, and maybe it was time for me to stop living for them. To stop wondering what they would think or how they would feel. I had to start living for me. I didn't have to fix them. I didn't have to make them see me, because I was already starting to see myself for the first time in years. And I would never let them take that away from me again. The decision I made to cut off the call with my mother didn't bring the satisfaction I thought it would. There was no cathartic release, no deep breath of finality. There was just a heavy silence. A silence that pressed in around me like the walls of the apartment were closing in on me. I had done it. I had finally drawn the line, but it wasn't enough to simply cut them off. It wasn't enough to just end the conversation. Because now I had to live with it. It felt like an open wound. The moment I hung up, I thought the healing would begin, but instead I just felt hollow, like I had sacrificed something essential. I had burned the bridge that could have taken me back to some version of my old self. The version of me who used to be hopeful, who used to think that maybe, just maybe, love could fix things. But that version of me was gone. Now I had to figure out who I was without them. The days after the call passed in a blur. I kept busy at the bookstore, helping customers, pretending that everything was fine. But it was. I felt the weight of their absence pressing down on me every second of every day. I kept asking myself if I had done the right thing. If I had been too harsh, too quick to burn bridges that couldn't be rebuilt. I knew I would never get the answers I wanted from them, but that didn't stop the guilt from clawing at me. It wasn't until one quiet afternoon when I was organizing the bookshelves, my hands busy with something familiar, that I got another email. It was from the same anonymous source. "Max has been in an accident. He's hurt badly. Your parents are asking for you." I stopped, the book slipping from my hands and scattering on the floor as I stared at the screen. My heart stopped for a beat. Max, for a moment, everything in my body froze. I couldn't process it. My mind refused to let me understand what it meant. Max, my brother, the one I had let go of, the one who had barely been a part of my life, was hurt. Badly. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to throw the phone across the room and pretend I hadn't seen the message. But I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the words as they burned into me. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Was I supposed to care? Was I supposed to be there for him, to put everything aside and just go? I hated myself for even wondering. This wasn't about him anymore. This wasn't about saving him. This was about me. About the decision I had made to finally free myself. But in the deepest part of my heart, I couldn't help but wonder. Would I really be able to walk away from him, just like I had walked away from them? The truth was, the anger I had been carrying, letting go of the need to prove something. Letting go of the idea that I had to fix everything. Letting go of the guilt that had been eating me alive, telling me that I was wrong for not going back, wrong for walking away. I had spent so long holding onto this belief that family was supposed to be everything. That no matter what, no matter how badly they hurt me, I should always go back, always try again. But the truth was, I had spent my entire life sacrificing my own needs for theirs. And I was done. I hit delete. The weight that lifted off my shoulders was immediate, like a cloud breaking apart after a storm. It wasn't the kind of relief I had expected. It wasn't about some grand sense of victory. It was quieter than that. It was the peace of finally letting go of something that no longer served me. I had spent years fighting for a family that didn't see me. I had tried so hard to be loved by people who didn't even know how to love me. But now, I was done trying. I wasn't going to keep hurting myself for people who couldn't or wouldn't care. The world outside my window seemed brighter suddenly. The sun, which had been hidden behind clouds for so long, peeked through, casting a soft glow on the apartment walls. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was breathing again. I didn't need to go back. I didn't need to fix things with them. I needed to fix things with myself. And for the first time, I felt like I had the power to do that. The decision to let go of Max and my parents wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The beginning of something I didn't fully understand yet. I thought for so long that freedom would feel like a loud explosion, like a sudden release from the chains that bound me. I thought I would feel this rush of euphoria, this overwhelming sense of I did it. I thought I would be dancing in the streets, ready to face the world with a triumphant smile on my face. But the truth was, freedom didn't feel that way. It felt heavy. It felt quiet. It felt like the calm after a storm, but the kind of calm that makes you realize how much damage was done. How much wreckage is left behind. It was like stepping into the aftermath, the ruins, and realizing that the hardest part wasn't the fight, it was the rebuilding. I spent weeks processing everything. There was no huge moment of clarity, no grand epiphany. Just days that bled into nights and nights that felt like they were never-ending. I tried to focus on work, on the things that gave me structure. The bookstore became my refuge, a place where I could hide in the quiet, where no one knew my past, no one could judge me for the choices I had made. The customers, the books, everything about that place was comforting in its simplicity. But even in that quiet, I felt the weight of my decisions pressing on me. Every time I walked into that store, every time I stood behind the counter, I couldn't shake the thought, am I doing enough? Maybe it was because of the time I spent alone in that small apartment. The walls seemed to close in around me, the emptiness echoing louder than anything I could fill it with. I had no one. And that truth, that hollow feeling in my chest, would not go away. Sometimes I would sit in the window seat, staring out at the city below, watching people pass by. They all had lives, they all had people to go home to, people who loved them. And I was here, alone, with only the sound of my own thoughts. I would tell myself that I was okay, that I had made the right choice. But there was a part of me that wondered if I was lying to myself. If I was really okay, or if I was just fooling myself into thinking I didn't need anyone. Because deep down, I still longed for connection. I still wanted to be seen, to be loved, but not by them. Not by the people who had tried to tear me apart. One evening, after a long day at the bookstore, I came home to find an envelope waiting for me on the doorstep. It was plain, simple, and unmarked, nothing to indicate where it had come from or who had left it. My stomach tightened as I picked it up. I opened the envelope slowly, my fingers trembling as I pulled out the letter. It was short. Too short, but it didn't matter. Claire, it began, I'm sorry. I know we can't undo the past, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive us. I don't expect anything from you, but I want you to know that we've changed. That we're not the same people anymore. Max is getting better. He's asking for you, I'm asking for you, please come home. Mom, I read it twice, 3 times, 4. The words were simple, but they hit me like a tidal wave. A wave of confusion, guilt, anger, and dare I say it, hope. Hope. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect to still feel anything for them after everything they did, after everything I had been through. But there it was, a spark. A flicker of something deep inside me that made my heart ache in ways I couldn't explain. Could I forgive them? Could I really let go of the past and give them a second chance? I had spent so long convincing myself that I was better off without them, that I was strong enough to stand on my own. But now, after reading this letter, I wasn't so sure. The doubts crept in, slow and steady, like weeds growing in the cracks of my resolve. I thought about Max, lying in a hospital bed, recovering. I thought about my mother, who was still my mother, despite everything. I thought about the years I had spent wishing they would care, wishing they would see me, wishing they would love me the way they loved him. And yet, I had just shut them out. Maybe that was the hardest part of all. Letting go didn't just mean walking away. It meant confronting the truth that they were still my family and they were still a part of me, even if I didn't want them to be. But I wasn't the same person I was when I first left them behind. I was different. Stronger, even. I had fought for myself, and I had learned how to live on my own terms. I had survived the worst of what they had put me through, and I had come out the other side. The question wasn't whether I could forgive them. The question was whether I could trust myself enough to make that decision. I stared at the letter, my heart pounding in my chest. Could I go back? Could I really walk into that world again? The world that had tried to break me? The world that had tried to make me into something I was? I didn't know the answer yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them take my power again. I wasn't going to let them control me. I had learned how to walk away, and I had learned how to survive. But the real question now was, what was I willing to walk towards? I kept the letter for days, maybe longer than I should have. It sat on the table, its edges curling, the ink slightly smudged from where I'd read it over and over again. My mother's words, I'm sorry. I know we can't undo the past, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive us, echoed in my mind constantly. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to resist the pull, to stand firm in my decision. But the truth was, I was scared. Scared that if I went back, I would be letting them in again. Scared that if I opened the door, it would all come crashing down. I had spent so long fighting to find myself, to be free of the weight they placed on me. I had spent years trying to convince myself that I was better off without them, that I was better off on my own. And now, here was this letter, shattering the walls I'd so carefully built around myself. I stood by the window one evening, staring out at the city lights, my thoughts drifting like the traffic below. I had made it this far. I had created a life for myself, independent and strong. But was it enough? The question lingered. I had spent all this time convincing myself that forgiveness meant weakness. That going back to them would make me less than I was, less than the person I had fought so hard to become. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that forgiveness wasn't about them. It was about me. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing their actions. It wasn't about letting them back into my life without consequences. It was about me freeing myself from the burden of anger and resentment I had been carrying for so long. And yet, even as I made this realization, there was a part of me that felt lost. Was I really ready to forgive? Could I honestly say that I had healed enough to even try? Max was still recovering. My parents were still broken, but none of that mattered. What mattered now was me. My peace. My future. I walked to the table, picked up the letter, and held it in my hands. I could feel the years of hurt, the weight of the past, sitting in my palms. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't going to let it control me. I carefully folded the letter and placed it in the drawer, shutting it tightly. It was a decision, one I had to make for myself. I wasn't going back, not in the way they wanted me to. But that didn't mean I couldn't find peace with the past. The truth was, I had been living in the shadow of my family's mistakes for so long that I forgot how to stand in the light of my own life. And now, for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally step into it. The road to peace wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be smooth, but it was my road to walk. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my family, dictate the terms anymore. I thought about Max, about how his life was unfolding, about how his pain and suffering had shaped him in ways I couldn't begin to understand. But I wasn't going to be his savior. I couldn't be. And I wasn't going to let guilt drag me back into a toxic situation that would only hurt me more. I thought about my parents, too, about how much they had failed me, how much they had taken from me. But they were still my parents, and in some twisted way, I still loved them. And maybe, just maybe, that love would have to be enough to let go of the anger. Maybe forgiveness was more about letting go of the past than it was about them. I wasn't going to heal them. I wasn't going to fix them, but I could heal myself. That night, I decided to take the next step, to move forward, to start living without the weight of the past on my shoulders, to stop letting them haunt me, to stop letting their mistakes define my future. I went out the next day and registered for classes at a community college. I wanted to learn. I wanted to grow. I wanted to create something that was mine and mine alone. I had already built so much from the wreckage they left behind. Now, it was time to build something new for myself. I didn't need to ask for permission anymore. I didn't need to wait for anyone's approval. I was going to live my life, on my own terms, without the shadow of my family's past hanging over me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. It was small, quiet, but it was real. The road ahead would be hard, I knew that, but it would be mine. I've learned that healing isn't a destination, it's a journey, one that unfolds in ways you don't expect. I'm not sure I'll ever fully recover from everything that's happened. The scars are still there, some buried deeper than others, but they're part of me now. They're a reminder of the strength I never knew I had, of the choices I made to break free and start again. I'm not the person I used to be. I don't have the same naivety about family or about love. But maybe that's okay. The old Claire, the one who believed in the fairy tale of family and unconditional love, is gone. The new Claire, the one who stands here now, has learned that love isn't something you demand. It's something you give freely, but only to those who truly deserve it. Max, my parents, they'll always be there in some part of my story. No matter how much I wish to erase the hurt, the betrayal, the damage they caused, they will always be part of my past. I can't change that, but I can change how I let it affect me. I can choose to move forward, to make peace with what's happened without letting it hold me back. I'm not sure what the future holds. I'm not sure where my path will lead. But I've finally started to realize that I don't need to carry my family's mistakes with me anymore. I'm free. And while that freedom doesn't come without its cost, it's mine to claim. So, as I sit here now, ready to step into this new life, this new version of myself, I realize that the journey doesn't end here. It's just beginning. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest gift I could ever give myself. There's still so much to rebuild, so much to discover. But I've learned that healing doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to follow a straight line. It just has to move forward. And for the first time, I'm ready for that. Thank you for sticking with me through this journey. The road ahead is uncertain, but I'm no longer afraid of what it might bring. Sometimes the hardest part is letting go, but it's also the most freeing. If you've ever had to choose your own path, to rebuild after something that tried to break you, I'd love to hear your story. Subscribe to stay with me on this journey. The next chapter is only beginning.